All right, recording. Welcome to episode 5 of the MTI podcast. We've got Rob, Kelson, and myself, Charlie here. Got a couple things to chat on today. So I know, Rob, we wanted to kind of go over some of the design processes and needs analysis of building out a good fitness assessment. I think to give context here, I think we've got damn near a dozen fitness assessments that are divided amongst our various populations, and then obviously by within the military especially, we've built out some to help solve any kind of branch specific or job specific problem. And anybody who's spent some time in the military knows that, especially in recent times, the military likes to spend a whole heck of a lot of money on designing pretty complicated fitness assessments. So, Rob, what goes into it?
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to say is that from a strength and conditioning coach perspective, when you have to sit down and do a fitness assessment for your athletes, and the thought exercise that goes into that is incredibly illustrative and educational for you, because you have to take a step back and identify first what are the fitness demands of the athletes, their jobs or their sport, and then the exercises that adequately or properly assess those demands, and then put it all together in an assessment that makes sense, that flows. It doesn't take all day. I remember going to I was at Bragg with the ODA there, and it took me in to talk to the coach there, Thor coach. I think it was Thor at that time, and I asked him what his fitness assessment was for his athletes, and he didn't have one. And that's, I think that was just, and because you don't have a fitness assessment, I guess what it does is the assessment kind of gives you a North Star to kind of aim towards, and can change over time as you learn and grow. But just that thought exercise is really, really beneficial to any strength conditioning coach out there. So for the coaches out there listening to this, if you don't have assessments for your athletes based on job or sport, start doing it. It's really a great exercise, and it'll make you a better coach and programmer. I think I've designed probably more of these assessments than anybody anywhere. And the first thing that kind of goes into it is you kind of want an assessment that assesses, if you can, 80% of the mission direct fitness demands of the job. And by 80%, I mean 80% in terms of time and practice. So what are the athletes doing most of the time during their job? What fitness demand does that take? The trap is to, from a fitness perspective, assessment perspective, is to see some element that the athletes are doing that is may or may not need to be changed, but isn't used a lot. For example, let's say I'm training rock climbers, sport rock climbers. So these aren't alpinists with long, rucking demands, but they're sport rock climbers. And every once in a while, they've got like a 5-mile ruck to the base of the crag, and they got to carry in their bouldering pad or something. Maybe they're carrying a 45-pound pack. But this is every once in a while. Usually they just kind of roll up to the crag, and hike, for 30 minutes with a light backpack and the ropes, and they're ready to go. If I was to then, in their fitness assessment, because on occasion they do this 5-mile ruck of 45 pounds, make that a huge part of their fitness assessment. Sure, I would be covering part of what their fitness demands are, but I'd be wasting a lot of training time to what their primary fitness demand is in terms of rock climbers, and that's rock specific grip and grip strength endurance. So there are traps like that come out all the time that you have to kind of watch for. The second thing I kind of look at is to choose simple assessment exercise that prioritize fitness and not natural athleticism or technique. This is another tricky part. A good example of this from the current ACFT is the power throw with the ball, where you kind of throw a ball over your head and it's supposed to assess power for Army guys in the Army. And the ball is a 10-pound ball. I can't find any specific details on what specific diameter the ball needs to be used. It could be out there, or if there's a consistent grip strength or grip for the ball. But my intuition tells me that with any type of overhead medicine ball throw, where you kind of throw it behind you, bigger hands are going to make a huge difference in how far you can throw that ball. And also a lot of technique. Does it really measure power? I'm not sure. I think at some point it stops measuring power and starts measuring technique. And so that's just a good element of that. Another one that was in an assessment a few years ago for Air Force Special Tactics was a dynamometer squeeze, where they had electronic dynamometer, which is you kind of grip onto it and you squeeze as hard as you can, and it gives you a grip strength. It's just a really narrow area of fitness. And I can know why the PhD who put this thing together, never trained in his life, put this on there, because there's a lot of research that says grip strength is, directly has some good correlation to overall strength and fitness, whatever, but it's a really narrow type of assessment. And I just don't think it is, it depends primarily on natural athleticism and not necessarily technique. So those are two examples, and you guys feel free to stop me if you have any questions. The third thing you got to think about is simple, common equipment that is widely available. This is really important. If you're going to have a high jeopardy fitness assessment, high jeopardy means that the fitness assessment results affect the person's performance ratings and/or career. They need to be able to train for it. And if the fitness assessment deploys equipment that isn't widely available, then they can't adequately train for it before the actual assessment. A good example of this is, going back to that Air Force Special Tactics, one of the events in it at that time was a row, like a 2,000 meter row or something for time. And if guys are deployed downrange, they didn't have a rower available, then they wouldn't be able to practice or train for that. And I don't know what it's like now, but Army and the ACFT and the trap bar deadlift. I know when the ACFT was initially prescribed for guys, a lot of the units did not have a lot of trap bars and plates, so their athletes or the Army guys could train up for this event. And the assessment is a 3RM trap bar deadlift. So it was just unfair to have this equipment requirement for this event, and athletes not have this equipment available to train with. So ideally, it's simple, common equipment that is widely available for the athletes to train with, so they can train up for the fitness assessment.
Hey Rob, just take a guess on how much money was spent on by the Army to field the equipment necessarily to implement the ACFT service wide.
That's a two-part question. The first is just
no, I got it. I got the number here. Just take a guess.
$300 million.
No, not that much. $78 million as of 2023, and that's after multiple adjustments to the ACFT itself, and there's, I guess, still an ongoing conversation about scrapping the program entirely because it's so challenging to implement and so complex to implement.
Yeah, that's another one down there, is how easy it is to implement. I can see, there was in the middle of the functional fitness craze, and part of that was weightlifting, and the Army wanted to get on, they were getting pressure from all their guys doing CrossFit, yada yada yada. But geez, I just don't see the safety of having somebody who's never done heavy deadlifts, having very little equipment and having them do it. The safety or the fairness really, for an assessment. And I don't know exactly how they do that assessment. Do they have like all these barbells lined up with different loads so athletes can move down efficiently? It just seems like a nightmare to me. The fourth is assessment exercises that are somewhat weatherproof. good weather isn't required for outside events, and/or on the other side of that, bad weather won't affect events. The one that kind of comes to mind is again, going back to the Army ACFT, the sled drag sprint carry event where they have to drag the sled, and the sliding surface that the sled is being drug on will affect the speed for that event. And so if you're dragging it on turf, it may be faster than it's on grass, the type of the sled, the load on the sled. I'm not too sure that's standardized. I've seen, in YouTube videos, different types of implements that are used for that. Anyway, that can make a difference. And again, the issue is for these high jeopardy events where, the score affects careers, you ideally want to make that just as simple as possible. And ideally, weather won't have a huge impact to that. I mean, if you have to run a fitness event in the winter outside, there's some things you can't get around, but you should hopefully be able to work around that. And it's just another issue. That's another one that would affect the throw in the ACFT if the balls were wet doing the power throw because it's raining outside. Fifth is something that's simple to administer. And getting back to the ACFT again, ideally, it'll be simple to administer, so you don't need a really complicated setup. It doesn't take all the time to set up. All those I don't say if it's red tape, but all that complication, what that leads to is just running the assessment or training for it less and less. People if it takes so much time to set up and score and everything. So something that's simple to administer. And then number 6 is event exercises that are obvious and easy to score in terms of range of motion and technique. One of the ones that's always been an issue is push-ups for the Army, and I'm sure that other military and lots of law enforcement who do have fitness assessments include push-ups. And the ACFT, they went from standard push-ups to push-ups, arms release push-ups to arms release, arms extended push-ups. I think for this reason, to make it as simple as possible to score from a range of motion and technique perspective to make sure the athlete is doing a proper push-up. I think the Marine Corps now has replaced sit-up or something with a plank, and it's unclear to me when the plank is a plank for time is when the plank for time ends. I mean, is it, and how flat does the back have to be? I mean, does the lower back have to be pushed up, which looks harder than if the lower back is allowed to slag? Doing it anyway, it's just an interesting thing to kind of think about is to ideally develop events that there's just as little as possible that can go wrong in terms of exercise, range of motion, or technique to score the event, whether the rep counts or doesn't count. And when you're designing these events, you run through your fitness assessments. If you have something like that, it'll be obvious you need to cut that exercise or find another exercise. Number 7 is a simple scoring system. It speaks for itself, but an easy way to score it so athletes know really quickly after they get done how they scored on it, or even as they're going through the assessment, how they're doing in terms of scores. Another one is an assessment that doesn't take all damn day. Going back to that, some of those early special fitness assessments, some of those were like spread over 2 days. It's just too long. They had 10 events and they're trying to get everything in there, and it just takes too long. And again, if it takes too long or it's difficult to administer or difficult to score, these special equipment, all that results in a big headache that'll eventually mean the assessment is administered less and less. And then finally is that
Hey Rob, sorry to interrupt you there. I just have, as far as it not taking all damn day, one of I think our longest fitness assessments is the Alpine fitness assessment, which I think if you run a decent score on that, it's like 3.5 hours. Like my question is like, when does it get too long? Is it like when it's negatively affecting what the results can be? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess, the Alpinist fitness assessment is, the primary fitness, demand of Alpinist is mountain endurance, and that assessment has a step up endurance event, and I think it's a 9 mile run. And so it's really assessing and it just takes time to do those events. And from Alpinist actual event, those are shorter than they actually experience in the field. But yeah, ideally, my ideal is that you're going to be able to complete the thing in 90 minutes, but ideally not over 2 hours. Of course, it depends on what you're assessing and what the job is. And the Alpinist fitness assessment is an outlier, perhaps, for an overall fitness assessment. But yeah, 90 minutes is kind of what I think we've been able to do operator ugly in the past, and right about 90 minutes, and that includes a 3 mile ruck run. So you want to, and if the assessment is quick and efficient to run, and you move rapidly from event to event, you're able to, that'll help speed the whole process along. So people aren't there all damn day. But yeah, ideally 90 minutes, unless there's some kind of something in the job or the recreational specialty of the athletes are training that requires more endurance work.
So with something like the Alpinist fitness assessment, if you, for some reason, you just can't complete one of the events, for instance, like the last event is a 15-kilometer run, a 9 mile run. Is that still worth doing the next day? And if so, like, is that how you want to repeat it in the future to see what your results are?
No, in this case, I'd want you to do it on that same day. The idea is that you're doing that endurance work after all that prior work. It's a totally different event. It's a totally different assessment for doing that 9 mile run fresh the next day.
Gotcha.
The idea is to have you pre-fatigued to have to do it. Because again, a 2 alpine climb, especially a fast and light climb, you're looking at a 24-hour event, car to car. I mean, guys are running the Grand here in 3 hours. So, but let's say you're doing the Grand Traverse, which is the fast guys are able to do that in like 12 hours. I mean, that's amazing. That's still a 12-hour event. And now we're at, so for the assessment here, we're doing a 3-hour assessment to try to get you to see if you're ready for that event. So no, I think, again, it kind of goes back to what the actual fitness demands of the sport event or job are. That can help dictate. So that's purpose driven to be at the end of that. Just like in Opera Ugly, the last event is a 3 mile ruck run. After all that other work ahead of time, it's kind of designed after the Black Hawk Down. I think those guys had to run out. So,
Gotcha.
I guess, and finally, ideally, the fitness demand it should have a prescribed warm up. And for the life of me, I can't find any of these military based type fitness assessments that have a prescribed warm up. Like I don't see there's one for the ACFT. There wasn't one for the APFT. I mean, the warm up will make a difference in how you perform, and it's also a way to make the event more run more consistently. So all the athletes start the same warm up. Everybody does a warm up at the same time. The warm up is consistent across every athlete, and then they're able to get in there and go right into the event. And so I think all fitness assessments should have a prescribed warm up, and ours do. Any other questions or concerns or critiques of that list? Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I have one question on it. So in the military, I think it's probably applicable for law enforcement and fire too. There seems to be two varieties of assessments, and they might bleed over into some technique stuff. But one is you have your general fitness test, whatever that might look like, and that usually has a fairly extensive scoring system, so that you're able to essentially plot out where your performance is. But once you get into training, and I think this is probably true at just about every military school, is that there's a standard, right? Where it's a pass fail kind of event. We don't necessarily have that in our scoring of kind of a pass fail. We often have, poor, good, excellent scoring. So you could probably ascertain where passing might be in that. But I was curious on, I understand that the military testing often is tied into promotion scores and stuff like that. But I wonder if from just even further simplifying it, if it wouldn't be better just to say, this is what the standard is across the board. Perhaps that's job specific or MOS specific, but making it simply a pass fail event with additional scoring to understand where you're at. Do you think there's goodness in that?
Well, when you say a standard, it seems to me that in the military, you'll have your, for example, the Army, ACFT, but then at Ranger School, there's a pass fail for the number of push-ups you have to complete, a pass fail for the 12-mile ruck at the end of the entrance week you have to complete for time. And same is true for, I think, for all selections or for most selections. Yeah, I don't know how to address that, especially in the military and law enforcement. And the reason I say that is because we have the realities that they have to deal with, which is the political element of it. In other words, if the standard is in the middle on a bell curve of what men score, and only 10% of the women taking the assessment are able to meet the standard, that's one of the problems with the ACFT. And I think it was the Canadian Tuck, what they were doing. They had to pull that event because female athletes were having much more difficulty than men completing it. So there's definitely some political aspects to that they have to deal with it. Perhaps I don't, but they haven't made it easy on themselves. Some of the assessments that have been developed. I guess what I'm getting at is, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if there's a correct answer to that. Although I do know that I guess the way I kind of see it set up for the military now is that you kind of have your general fitness assessments where you have, scores go everywhere. But if you want to do something special, like, go to a special school, go to special forces, you have to meet a standard that is somewhat above the minimum of what the general fitness service-wide fitness assessment is. And they're able to justify that standard because you don't have to be, you don't have to be an Army or a Marine recon guy. But if you do, then you got to make the standards of the basic recon school, right? So that's the same on the law enforcement side. For example, it's been very difficult for many law enforcement agencies to either implement or keep service-based or department-based general fitness assessments because of lawsuits and union resistance. But just about every SWAT team has a fitness assessment and standards that are required for the SWAT candidates and SWAT members to be every year. And the reason they're able to justify that or keep that through the courts is that you can be a police officer but not be a member of SWAT. But if you want to be a member of SWAT, because it's another level, I guess, that you have to meet this standard. Do you kind of understand that answer?
Yeah, I wonder if just from my own experiences, it always seemed like the standards were the number was squishy, right? It wasn't necessarily based on anything, or perhaps it's based on some variety of a bell curve, but is the bell curve the appropriate thing to create a standard off of, right? Ideally, the standard would be based off of correlating a number to successful performance in the mission-based tasks associated with that unit, right? So if you're able to hike with a 45-pound load for 12 miles under X, under X time, then you're going to be generally successful across the broad spectrum of all load carriage mission sets or something along those lines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't know there's ever been that type of research. There has been I remember reading a study where the average load carriage for Afghanistan daytime missions was like 45 pounds or something. And I wonder if the reason those standards may be squishy is because of bell curve, and they simply got to get so many bodies through the initial week or whatever to go into training to fill up the bodies they need, to fill the retiring or whatever members of that unit. So, for example, you're going to Ranger School and they need to fill so many billets, and they know that at the end of the first week, or they kind of know already what the attrition rate is over the course of Ranger School past the first week. And they know generally, say that's this 50% attrition and they need to fill 100 bodies, then they need 200 bodies coming into that first week. See what I mean?
Yeah.
To chance of meeting those. I don't know if that actually happens. There would probably be some controversy if that did happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because they still got to fill bodies, fill those slots.
Might be interesting to take a look at that. I would imagine, I don't know, Kelson, if you have any context on this, but I think the physical gates that you have to pass at Buds have been in place for quite a long time. So it'd be kind of interesting to sift through some of that data and see, if you can run what it's like, what are the events that you have to pass to get through Buds in terms of like PT tests?
Well, everything gets a little more difficult as you go on in each phase, but like obviously the initial assessment is it's like a 500-meter swim. I think it's a 1.5 mile run. It used to be in boots and pants. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's just in shorts and tennis shoes, which I kind of think that changes the outcome, quite a bit. There's a lot of difference when there's more weight on your feet. But I think the general standard to like go to Buds is the same. But as far as like the phases as you go, your run times drop, or the requirement, swim times drop, and then your obstacle course. Those are like the 3 main criteria that you have to continually pass in order to stay there.
Yeah, I wonder if, since those have been relatively consistent over time, I wonder if that's something we could take a look at, and just in terms of predicting performance based on a certain time or event performance. Like if you are below X, you have a X% likelihood of success in this course. Obviously, controlling for injury, etc.
Right. Yeah, that would be interesting.
I remember this is from years ago, but I remember reading a study. I can't remember what school or selection it was, but guys actually got more fit during selection. From what Kelson just described, I would assume that at Buds, that athletes would lose fitness as they went through selection because of the lack of recovery of maybe nutrition. But that may not be the case. They could actually get better. I guess it all depends, especially if the events are the same and they get more familiar with the events and the training specifically to the events. Yeah, those are interesting questions. I don't know if we're able to get the data to look into that, but that would be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think the one thing within that, I went to Buds at 152 pounds and I left at like 172 pounds. To where like
you put some math on.
Yeah. I mean, they feed you incredibly well, and yeah, it definitely helped me out. Probably didn't help out the bigger guys though.
that good skinny fat build.
I don't know about that. I don't think you can get skinny fat there. Come out of there with a dad bod.
Well, maybe that's something we can take a look at in the future. I mean, it just seems like there's oftentimes a lot of emphasis put on these scoring systems because it is good from a natural competitiveness perspective, just getting guys to harness the competitive spirit and all that stuff. There's goodness in that for sure. But if you're spending 10 hours on preparing for this particular physical event because you want to max it out, as opposed to just the scoring is just pass fail, you're going to dedicate less time to it necessarily, which may enable more time for job specific training, right? So just in terms of allotting time to something that is much more specific to the job set, as opposed to spending a lot of time on fitness specifically for maxing out a score that might not improve. I'm sure at some point there's negligible returns over a certain fitness level, right? Just I'm curious if that would.
There's a trap in that too, because training for fitness is so relatively simple and direct. I remember getting this something that came in from a guy who was training ROTC guys for the Danhurst competition, which is a military competition for like West Point cadets and ROTC cadets. And I asked him to send me his scores for his team, and certainly there were some improvement to be made on the fitness side of the scores, but where the real improvement to be made was on the shooting. In other words, they didn't do that well in the marksmanship part, and focusing time there would have done a lot more towards improving their their overall score. And I think about this a lot in terms of just line unit or any military unit, in terms of training for deployment or just for their job, and where priorities should be, because it seems like every new CO of every new platoon, company, battalion, squadron, whatever it is, their number one priority or close to the top is physical fitness. And the question is whether or not the emphasis there really translates over to mission success in the real world. For example, should they be spending more time doing marksmanship? Should they be spending more time doing communication skills, small team tactics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And then hate to open up a can of worms here, but on the other end, there's a big question of whether or not the attributes measured in selection translate to special forces success. In other words, what is the element of success in special forces that is the most determinant to guys being successful? For example, in other words, how many guys fail out of the Q school after they make it through XFAS? And is it consistent where FSAS isn't measuring something that should have been done before in the selection?
Right. Yeah, well, maybe that's something we can take a look at.
Charlie, I hate to do this, but I just had somebody drive up. I got to take a break. Can you hang on just a sec?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hey, Neil, how's it going? Okay, we're still recording, right?
Yep. Any save rounds on the fitness assessment conversation?
Yeah, I just want to ask one last question as far as fitness assessment. I'm kind of stuck on the Alpine fitness assessment because, well, I've looked at it for a while. I'll probably do it here in the future. But I guess my question is it more difficult creating an assessment for a civilian based activity versus a military activity?
No, the process is the same. First is to identify the fitness demands of the event, the 80% both in time and activity. So and then second is to go through the exercises that assess those fitness demands, and then you go through the process of choosing simple exercises, easy equipment. There's some things that you maybe can't train or assess for. An example of that would be balance and skiing. I don't have a downhill ski assessment, but if I did, balance probably wouldn't be one that I would try to assess because it's difficult to train and assess for. So the process, I think the process would be the same. Where you kind of get in arguments is athletes will come back and say, what about this, or what about this, and what about this? And generally the what about this are going back to narrow little elements of aspects of the job or the event that don't kind of fit that 80% mode. Again, the fitness assessment isn't designed to assess everything. It's just designed to get that 80%. Because if you have one that assess design everything, then you might as well go out and do a full-on exercise and do it that way somehow. But that then you get away from the simple and easy to administer. So yeah, in my experience, I would tell you it is, again, I'll just reiterate that it's really an interesting intellectual exercise and an instructive intellectual exercise from a strength coach perspective, to force yourself to design fitness assessments for your athletes. It really is. Like, there's several mountain events that I haven't designed one for. For example, whitewater kayaking. That would be interesting. Motorcycle, cross country, mountain bike racing. That would be interesting. Downhill mountain bike racing. That'd be interesting. And forcing ourselves to go through the fitness, the intellectual process to design those events, I think would make our programming for those activities better. So yeah, that's I just like to reiterate that, and that's probably something that I'll make you do, Kelson. Good, I gave yourself more stuff to do.
I'll write it down.
But I don't think I have one for backcountry hunting, so put that one down there. I think that'd be a good one too.
Okay.
Cool. Well, we can move on to the next topic. So I'm writing up something right now on improving commissioning opportunities for enlisted personnel. So I can kind of give a quick background on this, and you guys can ping with any questions. But as it stands right now, you have to have a bachelor's in order to get a commission. So that is a challenge for high performing enlisted personnel that might be interested in going the officer route, because you have to go to school, right? So you're either going to school while you're in the service, of which there's lots of programs that you can do that, but it obviously comes with a pretty significant time commitment. And if you're in a busy unit, oftentimes it's just really not quite possible. The other option is to work through some of the existing programs. So, both the Army and the Marine Corps have programs where they'll send a soldier to school for 3 to 4 years to get your bachelor's, and then you can go through the commissioning process. But obviously, that's the question is that necessary, right? So if you have a high performing sergeant or staff sergeant, and they're experienced, they're professional, they've shown interest in the science of arms, for lack of a better term, why wouldn't you just give those guys a commission or put them through an assessment of some sort in order to attain a commission without the bachelor's degree requirement? So I'll kind of open it up to you guys on questions on this. Both of you guys have read the draft of the article, and I did a little bit of additional research on kind of the origins of the bachelor's degree requirement, which is quite squishy. What you guys got for me?
Can you, Charlie, can you go into that research you've done on the bachelor's degree requirement? Because we discussed this before, but it seems that is the main difference, or that's the main requirement to qualify to become an officer, is a bachelor's degree. So can you go into what you found, the origins for that are?
Yeah. So I found a great academic article from Dr. Arthur Coombe, who's a command historian. This is from 2010. But he goes through the full history of that requirement. And the fact of the matter is, it has not always been a requirement, and it has gone through multiple iterations of being a requirement and then not being a requirement. So it kind of started in pre-World War One. So there was a Plattsburgh Commission, I believe it was called, or Plattsburgh Act rather, which was an effort to further professionalize the military. And so one of the recommendations was a requirement for the bachelor's degree. And, at the time, I think it was 1913, that was having a bachelor's degree was rare, right? The vast majority of the population did not have a bachelor's degree, so it was, you know, a indicator of intellect. Whereas now, if you were to compare it, you know, many more folks per capita have bachelor's degree. It's almost just a, you know, you almost have to have it to get any kind of white collar job these days. So it was codified to a degree in 1920 with a National Defense Act of 1920, but has gone through multiple adjustments. So I think it was left essentially to the discretion of the individual branches to adjust. So obviously during times of war, when the military at large is increasing in size dramatically in a very rapid amount of time, they would decrease the educational requirements associated with earning a commission. And so this happened a lot in World War II. This happened a lot in Vietnam and Korea. There was an interesting stat in here that I would have never expected. In 1970, so right smack dab in the middle of the Vietnam War, 50% of Army captains did not have a bachelor's degree. So they had made adjustments to those programs where, you know, if you had a 2-year degree, that checked the box, and it kind of varied from ROTC programs, OCS programs, enlisted commissioning programs, where they would decrease that educational requirement. That also came with some downsides. So there's as like you have now with the ASVAB, which is essentially a IQ test of sorts. They saw that those scores decreased dramatically as they decreased the educational requirements. There was also issues with a lack of congruency amongst academic institutions. So, you know, as the increase of bachelor programs proliferated across the United States, the academic gateways to get into a bachelor's program often decreased. So a lot of them were just simply, you know, you have to have a high school degree or a GED in order to get into a bachelor's program. There wasn't any kind of application process. So you see how there can be issues with this, with the current academic infrastructure as it stands now, right? Compared to when it was originated in the early 20th century. So it's ebbed and flowed, and really the only time that the bachelor's degree became a ironclad requirement was in the 1980s, and that was really just due to a decrease in the size of the military post Vietnam War, and so the services were able to be more selective and add in more hard gateways in order to apply for a commission.
Charlie, do you know if someone received a battlefield commission once they like redeployed back to the States, if they were required to go to some kind of secondary education once they got back, besides like, you know, fork and knife school? Because just from my experience, I feel like college education for an officer, it's a lot of that goodness is in writing ability, because eventually you transition from the battlefield to writing policy within the military. Do you think there's benefit in a college degree for that?
Yeah, I mean, on the first question, battlefield commissions, you know, it became increasingly rare. So I pulled up some stats on that. World War I, there was approximately 6,000 battlefield commissions. World War II, there was approximately 25 to 26,000 battlefield commissions. And then it dropped significantly after that. So in Vietnam, there was only less than 100, I believe. And Korea, I wasn't able to find any statistics there, but oftentimes what would happen in the services at large was a shrinking of the military post-war, right? So the battlefield commission stood; those guys could stay in, but it wasn't a necessity for those guys who wanted to stay in, who had earned battlefield commissions, to get that bachelor's degree. But oftentimes, World War II, for instance, lots of the guys lost rank after the war ended because they had to kind of resize the organization for not an actively at war military. In terms of the bachelor's degree requirement, yeah, I mean, I think you're probably onto something. A lot of the officer pathway is they're training large commanders, right? So the whole purpose of the commissioning structure, to a degree, I guess, is we need good lieutenant colonels, we need good colonels, we need good generals. You don't necessarily need those good platoon leaders, right? That's more of like a on-the-job training for future billets once you've gained rank, because you've got a host of senior enlisted who can effectively do that job. More than likely, that might not be the case always, but that is certainly how it's built, right? And its intended purpose to have these, senior enlisted in positions that are, I guess, technically advisors to a very new officer and a very inexperienced officer. So yeah, this article, certainly highlighted that, the more you decrease the educational requirements, the less intelligent the officer corps is as a whole, right? So I think it certainly supports that to a degree. But I would argue, my argument for this article specifically that I was writing up was that you have a host of very good enlisted personnel that might have this giant hurdle of a bachelor's degree, but would otherwise be excellent officers and increase their compensation, increase their career opportunities over the course of a career, and more than likely increase retention of talented people that you want to have stick around in the military, which is commonly a problem in our military in the modern era.
It's so interesting as we kind of been discussing this offline, and then now as I've been thinking about this, and it seems that there's already there are some, the warrant officers, and I just searched, of course, ChatGPT to see if you need a bachelor's degree to be a warrant officer, and you don't. I know there is a warrant officer program on the Army side for pilots, and it seems so that there's this one idea that you can maybe go enlisted and you do need enlisted experience to become a warrant officer, I think. So you can go enlisted to a warrant officer and stay in a specific field with a specific, technical job, and then you have the idea of the first responders, police, and fire guys. And as I understand correctly, you don't need a bachelor's degree to become a police lieutenant or a fire captain, but generally you do need to have some education in, criminal justice and/or fire engineering, and it would probably improve your application if you did have that. I know in the fire service you probably need to take a captain's test. I'm sure the same as maybe need to take a lieutenant's test for police departments. So there's this element where there are, at least in those services, where it's possible to become an officer per se without college education. And then the bigger question is why you need a college education in general to become an officer. And of course, I searched ChatGPT for this again, and it talks about enhanced critical thinking, problem skills, increased knowledge base, leadership development, enhanced communication skills. And then some of the negatives of that would be, potential limitation of talent pool, which is what you're getting out with your limited, you're concerned about limited options to go from enlisted to officer. I do know that and Charlie, were you OCS? I think you were, right, for the Marines.
Yeah.
And so, and what's your bachelor's degree in? I can't remember.
Political science.
And so, in OCS, did you get some military education courses as part of that?
Yeah, to a degree. OCS, I think it was 10 weeks or something along those lines. And yeah, you get just some really entry level history and stuff like that, but they don't teach any kind of, there's no military science there, right? It's really just, there's a little bit of history, but the purpose of OCS is to assess candidates for leadership potential, essentially. So they'll put you through a host of scenarios that are, they don't expect you to know tactics, right? Because you haven't been taught tactics to that point. But they are looking for you to have the capacity to problem solve in a very time condensed format, which is good. I thought that, ultimately there's a relatively high attrition rate at OCS. I think like my platoon there was around 40% attrition rate. So, for something that's entry level, that's significant. So I think there's goodness in that format. And then once you go, to your follow-on schooling, so in the Marines, you go to the basic school, which is a 6 or 7 month program that all officers go to before you're assigned an MOS. And that gives you the foundational small unit tactics stuff, right? The small unit tactics education, plus a host of other officer specific things like writing and administrative requirements, etc.
I do know that I went to Coast Guard Academy, and my degree was in political science, also a bachelor's degree. But we every semester, and then every summer, of course, we had military type courses. Like we learned navigation, and every semester was a course like that. I think West Point and the other military academies are the same. I think that ROTC, I guess I guess I'm getting back is that they seem to go to get an only bachelor's degree, become an officer in the military right now by just going to OCS and going to the basic school or something similar. The question is, if you need a bachelor's degree, shouldn't it be into military science or something field for the total degree? And it doesn't have to be right now. So that's just an interesting element to it.
Yeah, and that's what that's what the Brits do at Sandhurst. So that's their version of West Point, but their curriculum is much more military focused compared to the US service academies, which are, by all accounts, US service academies are excellent academic institutions. But they still follow kind of the US college accreditation process, which, has certain requirements for, variety. You got to take your basic sciences and your basic literature, etc. Whereas that Sandhurst, they have some of that, but it is definitely a military school, right? They focus heavily on the military sciences as academic credit courses, which is probably the better model, I would imagine, right? I mean, if you're training guys to be mechanics, like you want them to learn how to turn a wrench. You don't necessarily want them to learn about Socrates.
I do remember from my day, I spent a semester at West Point during my academy time, and I can't remember if I had to take a military studies course there. I did take, a course on nuclear policy and deterrence, and another one on Nazi Germany history. And I was totally amazed about the number of majors that were offered to the cadets there. They seemed really narrow. At the Coast Guard Academy, we had a much smaller school, but there were just 6 major offers, and 4 of them were science, engineering, and 2 were liberal arts. I did one of the arts ones, but that's really interesting. That idea there. I do know that this is just anecdotal. It'd be interesting to get Kelson's, if you can speak to this, Kelson, this experience of yours. I remember talking to a civilian who worked for the Navy, worked on designing torpedoes, but he remembers working with very experienced senior enlisted in that program, and in the Navy side, and he found that these individuals are great in their narrow area of expertise, but when they were challenged sometimes, if they were faced with a problem that was outside that area, and him having an electrical engineering degree and having that background allowed him to know how to find the answer, not knowing the answer, but how to find it in terms of how to do the research, how to look outside, how to kind of think through that process. It's kind of a tricky question to you, Kelson, but what was the experience you had in terms of working with officers on those types of challenges versus enlisted guys?
Yeah, so enlisted guys generally, kind of like you mentioned, is very, very narrowly focused on a subject. Like they're subject matter experts. So I think the difference there is between one of the things in college is you get really good at finding the answer. So in my opinion, going to college is, that's one of the huge benefits. Not only is it the writing and the critical thinking piece, but it's learning how to find the answer. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So for enlisted folks, like they're very much narrowly focused. What was the other part to that question, Rob?
I guess if you saw a difference, just between, if you were to become an officer in Navy Special Warfare, you would, I assume, come to the teams. I don't know. I guess if let's say the team was given a challenge, and you had your senior enlisted guys versus the officer in charge of the team, if you saw a difference in terms of where the officer's better at finding that answer for an out of the box thing. I guess I just want to challenge this idea that maybe the college degree gives you that, because that would be what you just said almost makes the argument that officers should have a college degree. And I just wonder if that's always the case. I don't know if you understand the question, but go ahead.
No, I do. I would say each part of the military is different, and the selection process in which they implement to get to a certain command will kind of weed out and recruit specific type of thinkers. And I'm just, this is my own personal opinion, not of the Navy or Naval Special Warfare, but they're very much focused on people that can receive a problem, find a solution to a problem, and then implement it. As far as an officer goes, he's there. He's more looking up and out to inform the commander, while the enlisted guys are solving the problem and giving status.
I guess going back to you, Charlie, what are you thinking in terms of? What do you think about like the Mustang model for a enlisted to officer program, that where a college degree was not required, but the officers on the resulting on the other side of that would be restricted to a narrow area of jobs like Army warrant officers who fly? What do you think about something like that? In other words, let's say you're a sergeant or a platoon sergeant. You want to become an officer. You don't have a college degree, but there's a system where you become an officer, but your job is then restricted to operational jobs in the infantry going forward. And maybe your rank is capped out at major or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think that maybe has some potential. That's certainly been the case historically. You know, I mean, it's really on the up and out model, or the up or out model, that is in place in the military now, where like you have to make certain benchmark, you have to make certain rank in a certain amount of time, or else you're going to get kicked out. It's fairly recent, right? I mean, there was been long historical instances of guys who stayed at a certain level for their entire career, and that was mostly a byproduct of just the size of the military, and there's just not additional billets upwards, which may, you know, that might suit some guys and that might suit other guys, not suit other guys, in terms of what they want to do with their career. So, you know, potentially, I think ultimately the issue at large is we're facing a pretty significant recruiting issue in the military. So let me see if I can pull up the stats on that. But it was, let's see, yeah, 23% of Americans age 17 to 24 are eligible for military service currently. So 23%. The rest are not eligible due to a host of medical, previous prescriptions, whatever the case may be. So, you know, you're starting to deal with a really small amount of folks to staff a fairly large army, that can increase in size dramatically in times of war. So I think there should be additional pathways to allow a really promising E5 at the end of his first term. He's got 4 years, right? Just like a college program is 4 years, but he's got 4 years of job specific training, and say, hey, we can give you a commission now. You're going to go to OCS. If you pass that, then you'll go to TBS and get your, or BOLIC, whatever, you know, whatever your job is going to be, to get your officer specific training, which is going to be a little bit different than what you've done in the past, but you have this great 4 or 5 years of experience and context of, you know, what the job looks like. And then, you know, push you back out to the forces, and maybe we attack the educational component down the road, right? Maybe that's going to be a requirement for you as you go to, you know, the next rank or whatever the case may be. I'm just not sure that the bachelor's degree is a good tool any longer, just based on how. So if we're taking, let's take another complex job like a software engineer. If you were to survey software engineers across the country, I would guarantee you that the vast majority of those don't have degrees in computer science, right? Most of these guys have degrees in something else, and then they go to a coding boot camp and get really nice, high-paying jobs as software engineers. So I think the bachelor's degree in the current climate, current environment, just isn't a great tool to use as a hard gate for everybody. I think it still should be the gate for somebody like me who didn't have any previous military experience. You should probably have to have done something, right, and done well at it. So I need to get that bachelor's degree, and I need to have a certain GPA, and I need to be testing well from a fitness perspective, and, you know, whatever IQ kind of assessments are done. But if I have somebody who is already performing well in a very similar role in the military to what they would do on the officer side as an enlisted guy, it seems like that's an easy one to do. And, you know, the worst thing from a military perspective, the worst thing you can do is just let that guy go. And I've seen that happen, where there's guys who are, you know, they're 22, 23, 24. They've done their 4 or 5 or 6 years. They're really fucking good at what they do, right? They know their tactics, they're good leaders, all that good stuff. And they just don't like what the enlisted pathway is going to take them from a career perspective, because it's it might be limited. So why limit them to just that pathway if they've displayed the traits and have the experience to show that they will likely be successful in an officer role? Why make it a hard gate for them to have to do? Because more than likely they're just going to get out and go do something else.
Yeah, I think that it's really an interesting, I know as part of this, and I mentioned it, that I took a look at, federal law enforcement and FBI agents. I think Secret Service, CIA, a lot of those DEA, a lot of those federal agencies, maybe even U.S. Marshals, I can't remember, all require bachelor's degrees, to apply for those schools, for those jobs. And it's not necessarily that you fall into a leadership position in your first, position as a, right out of the academies of one of those jobs. So it's just an interesting, requirement, and it does tie into something bigger that's going on in the nation right now, questioning the value of a bachelor's degree. It's an ongoing conversation that everybody's having. So yeah, really interesting. It'll be interesting to see what you come up with.
Cool. Let's see, what do we got? Last topic for the day. So Kelson is obviously making a transition currently from a 20-year career as a tactical athlete to now as a strength coach and mountain athlete. And I would imagine the fitness training for those have a lot of overlap, but probably some adjustment. So Kelson, wanted to get your take on, as you've gotten a few months away from your units, how your training approach has changed and how you're constructing your training, and how your goals may have shifted from a fitness perspective and from a mountain perspective.
I mean, they've shifted quite drastically, because now, so the last 20 years kind of training towards the hybrid athlete model of just relative strength and, building a large gas tank for work capacity, and generally focused on a 3-mile timed run, to now something that is, I get to train for what I want to do, which is mountain sports. And some of my goals are essentially is like, how can I move through the mountains as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Because if I can do that, well, one, I can do more things in the mountains. I can just do more objectives, and and then being quick and efficient. There's also an aspect to like beating the weather. So I think there's some goodness in that. So,
Can you identify anything tangible that so for instance, you had to train X while you were on active duty, but now that you're not, you've dropped whatever that component is?
Yeah. So as an example is one of the programs that Rob just released was the NSW Combine. And for that, it focuses a lot on relative strength through just various lifts: body weight bench press, hex bar deadlift, weighted pull-ups, stuff like that. And then there's a work capacity aspect, which is 300-meter shuttle. And the endurance aspect is a 3-mile timed run. And then there's a running portion. So that's kind of what I used to train for as the standards. I always mix some kind of multimodal endurance training in there, because going uphill has always been a hobby. So I kind of implemented that to where I could. But so currently, I kind of shifted a lot off the very specific strength. I still implement it into the program I'm doing now, which is it's an endurance program focused on the rut that'll happen in September 15th. So it's a 50K. So I do a lot of upward mobility endurance, but I also do some ancillary lifts, just to maintain upper body strength, look good naked, stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm currently doing.
Is
I would,
there it from a strength perspective, right? That's probably the biggest difference in between your military career and your mountain career now as a focus. Do you find yourself de-emphasizing the strength portion because you're not necessarily going to be spending 24 hours under wearing a kit, so you don't have that load bearing requirement as much as you once did?
for sure. I'll do 2 days of strength per week. But I'll still do some kind of endurance event that day. If I were to prioritize, I'd do endurance over strength just because of what future goals are, and that's a priority. But I still find time to implement that.
Any change in so Kelson's certainly not a big dude, but do you find that it's going to be advantageous for you to drop additional weight with the emphasis on kind of mountain objectives?
So I'm sitting at 180 right now. Um, throughout my time in the military, I kind of hovered around 175, but as I got older, it seems to you're able to like put on muscle a little bit easier just because your metabolism slows down. So I would like to drop a little bit of weight. I'm more focused on it now than over the last couple of months, just because if I can drop a little weight, I'll get a little faster, and that'll be beneficial on a lot of things, as far as you know any kind of like joint issues or tendonitis. It's all kind of a factor when you're carrying around more weight.
Yeah, it's I would imagine that's a fairly challenging transition because you've got 20 years of ingrained, I got to train for this, right? Like I need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, whereas now X, Y, and Z aren't necessarily as applicable as they once were.
Yeah, but I find myself I have to find a goal to work towards something, so I feel like it's always there.
Yeah.
So maybe that is part of that ingrained piece.
Yeah. You just find a new challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, after I get done with the rut, I'll probably roll right into some kind of like preseason ski, something like that. It might be a little early, but I mean, it'll give me, I don't know, 8 weeks or so to get ready for the ski season, and that's how I'm gonna kind of roll, is just continuously do preseason training until that season. Then I'll do some kind of in-season workout for maintenance, and keep going from there. I would say the coolest thing is, like, ever since becoming a strength coach, is now there's like an aspect of self experimentation. Um, and it kind of goes back to the mini study that we're doing right now, is the Alpine Pack Assessment, to where I can filter those mini studies into my programming currently. So I can do two things at once. I can get the results from mini study, and then I can also train at the same time. So that's some of the goodness that I've been experiencing.
Hey, Kelson, have you enjoyed the shift to endurance?
Um, it's
Have you had that, that period up there running, mile 18? I think you said you ran like 27 miles or something last weekend, where you're like in the flow, your feet aren't hurting. You're just like, this is pretty cool.
I feel like I'm more of I wouldn't say I'm natural at anything, but I definitely my body style favors endurance. So I think I think the answer is maybe. I don't know. I haven't had any kind of major epiphany or anything like that yet. What I have noticed is, shifting to endurance, it like decreases your overall relative strength, fairly decently. That's been one of my observations.
What's your how high are you? How tall are you?
6 foot.
Yeah, so I'd like to get 100. Let's see, mountain professional at 180, mountain athlete at 170 pounds, based on our ideal body weights. So I'd make you cut 10 more pounds. Haha.
It's all right. I'll put that on the list of backcountry hunting assessment.
Yeah, I think,
Rob says to drop weight.
Yeah, well, you got it's kind of interesting. We have our ideal body weights. I got mountain professional at 180 pounds, so right where you're at, and that's because generally a guide's pack is going to be significantly heavier than he would take, for his own alpine trip, because he's got to carry safety equipment and extra rope and all that stuff for his clients, and so the load carried is heavier. For a military athlete, for example, at 6 feet, I would have had you at 185 pounds. So you're a little light on the military side, actually. It's probably because you're more lean. But I guess the trade-off would be that you'd be losing muscle mass and increasing speed in the mountains, your mountain endurance. And and ideally, you wouldn't lose a whole lot of relative strength or strength per body weight, because certainly your max effort strength will go down, but also your body weight will go down. I guess that's kind of the idea. Although our relative strength standards are less for mountain athletes than they are for military athletes. I do know that as I got older, and especially I just enjoyed endurance more than I did, and hard work capacity or even heavy strength in the gym. But now at my age, I can definitely see, looking back, where having a high relative strength really made me solid in all the mountain stuff I did. Just feeling solid and kind of, just I guess the best word is solid, just in terms of strength and picking something up and moving. And I miss that now as I'm older and I just can't lift as heavy as I used to. So that's just a couple of interesting anecdotes for me, of course, in your own experience there. But I would hope that you enjoy the endurance more, but it doesn't seem like that's clicked for you yet.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm having a good time with. We'll see how it progresses through the future here.
Kelson, Rob's been trying to get me to drop to 185 pounds for years, and I keep telling him I was 185 pounds when I was like 15, so I don't think that's going to happen.
Charlie has like 22-inch biceps. His biceps are as round as my thighs.
You'd have to get rid of some of them quads.
No. The quads are the only thing that's been holding my knee together for the last 15 years. I'm missing a bunch of important ligaments that should be there but aren't. All right, sweet. I don't think we have anything else for today. Thanks for tuning in, and feel free, if you have anything you want us to chat on, email us at coach@mtntactical.com and we'll make sure to address it. Thanks, guys.